let's make a start. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to all of you here in the room at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and welcome to all who've joined us online as well. Apologies for the late start to this session. I think in German there's that wonderful concept of the akademisches Viertelstündchen, the academic quarter of an hour, which we have just abused. Apologies then. My name is Duncan Large. I'm the Executive Director of the British Centre for Literary Translation and Chair of the Petra E Network. For those who had a choice about which workshop to join, and I recognize that those online didn't, this is workshop number 3, and we're taking as our theme initial and continuous training for literary translators, best practices. I'm delighted to be joined by an exciting panel who are going to help me explore this topic over the next hour and 3/4, representing a variety of training initiatives at different levels and in different geographical contexts across Europe. Their biographies are available online, so I'll give just the briefest of introductions. In the order in which they will be speaking, they are Goedele De Sterck, a literary translator from Dutch to Spanish, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Translation and Interpreting at the University of Salamanca in Spain, and will be speaking on behalf of the TAL-Uni, the Dutch Language Union. I myself will be speaking next, and then we will hear from Françoise Wuilmart, Professor Emerita of Translation at the Institut Supérieur de Traduction et Interprète at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. Françoise founded and directs the Centre européen de traduction littéraire and the Collège européen des traducteurs littéraires de Senef in Belgium. Françoise was also a founding member of our host organization, CEATL. Our next speaker then will be Rosie Pihnas-Delpuech, who is a writer and literary translator from Hebrew, English and Turkish into French.
Not English. A bit.
Rosie taught at Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion universities, but has been based in France for the last 30 years. She's an editor at Actes Sud and teaches at the École de traduction littéraire in Paris. Our final speaker will be Jürgen Jakob Becker, who we've already heard from this morning. Jürgen is Managing Director of the Deutscher Übersetzerfonds, the German Translators Fund. He is Deputy Director of the Literarisches Kolloquium Berlin and Vice President of RECI. So each speaker will be giving an opening presentation of about 10 to 12 minutes, introducing the literary translator training activities in which they're currently involved, laying out best practice, and considering current challenges from their perspective. Followed in each case by a brief panel discussion, potentially. That will then leave around 20 to 30 minutes for questions from the audience at the end. For those who are online, unfortunately, for logistical reasons, we can't take questions from our many online attenders today, but we should have time to hear and respond to questions from those in the room. So, without further ado, can I invite our first speaker, Goedele De Sterck, to present.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Good afternoon, everyone here in the room and also at home. As Duncan already told, I'm currently an Associate Professor of Translation at the University of Salamanca and a literary translator from Dutch into Spanish, but I have also worked for several years as a teacher of Dutch as a foreign language and have over 20 years experience as a professional freelance translator. And it's because of these many hats that I've been invited to this panel on behalf of the Nederlandse Taal-Unie, which is known as the Union for the Dutch Language in English. As stated on its website, the Taal-Unie develops and promotes Dutch language policy in the Netherlands, Flanders and Suriname, and promotes the Dutch language worldwide. Next slide, please. It goes without saying that multilingualism and cultural diversity are cornerstones of the European project. Language skills and language learning are at the heart of the construction of the European education area. They are essential for mobility, cooperation, and mutual understanding across borders, and bring benefits to individuals, society, and business. One of the objectives of the EU's language policy is therefore that every EU citizen should know 2 languages in addition to their mother tongue. And the subtitle of the already mentioned European report, Translators on the Cover, links multilingualism with one of its own cornerstones, translation, and more specifically, literary and audiovisual translation. And translation is not only contributes to the promotion of cultural diversity, social and cultural inclusion, and European integration, but also enables equal cultural exchange, according to the EU's motto, United in Diversity. The latest, next slide please. The latest Eurobarometer, as you can see on the slide, shows that EU policy on language learning is broadly supported by European citizens. 86% believe that everyone in the EU should be able to speak at least 1 language in addition to their mother tongue, and 69% believe that everyone should be able to speak more than 1 language. Next slide, please. But despite this seemingly positive notes in terms of EU policy and citizen support for multilingualism, small and medium languages are under pressure. Several TaalUnie reports show that Dutch is losing ground at both intramural and extramural university level. The number of students studying Dutch and other foreign languages is falling alarmingly, not only abroad but also in Flanders and the Netherlands itself. In the Netherlands, for example, Romanian and Portuguese have simply disappeared from university curricula. Interest in languages is losing ground in favor of STEM, and also the ubiquity of English and translation from English, as we already have heard this morning. Worryingly, decisions about whether to maintain language courses are being made on a largely economic basis, and this makes smaller languages vulnerable, even more vulnerable. But foreign language programs are the breeding ground for future translators and cultural mediators. And since there can be no translation without language skills, this trend is a cause for concern, not only for the health and diversity of translation programs and the translation profession, but also for the quality and diversity of translators across Europe. The TaalUnie reports show that not enough language students are being trained to meet the demand for translators. For example, for some language pairs, including Dutch-Spanish, it is difficult to find candidates for the CELA, Connecting Emerging Literary Artists program, we already heard about also this morning. And the lack of translators and translations increases the lack of cultural diversity. In fact, the current European literary market is not as multilingual as one would hope. Internationalization is spreading cultural products, but this spread is not balanced. Cultural expressions from smaller, less powerful language areas do not reach international audiences as easily as those from major languages. Dutch language culture needs support in this respect. And the use of machine translation or relay translation is not an option to replace direct human translation of lesser used languages. In this regard, I would like to share with you a personal experience. I would like to quote a comment in a double-blind peer review to one of the papers I recently submitted for publication. The reviewer wrote, "Some naive comments could be avoided, such as the following, where the author addresses the European literary market." And what I wrote was, "The reduced number of language combinations endangers the cultural richness that is one of the core values of the European Union." And the reviewer wrote about it, "This is true, but the author does not seem to take into account the high incidence of relay translation." 2. It is difficult to pretend that the EU's multilingualism is respected and its cultural richness is translated if communication has to be carried out from all EU languages into all EU languages. And I wonder if we, as European citizens with lesser translated languages and literatures, don't demand the right to be translated directly, who will? Furthermore, the translation profession is changing dramatically as a result of technological developments. The emergence of neural machine translation, large language models, and generative AI is playing an increasing role even in literary translation, and the role of the translator in this process is changing. It is precisely because of developments in language technology that professionals with in-depth knowledge of languages and translation will continue to be needed to help develop, improve, monitor, and evaluate technological applications. Contrary to popular belief, the need for language professionals and translators is not diminishing. As Ruiz Casanova states, and I quote, AI will not eliminate translation or human translators, but it will formalize the former and redefine the work of the latter in the context of a new publishing production model. Technological developments have ethical, legal, and social implications and create a need for continuous training. This situation generates many, sometimes contradictory, opportunities and challenges. On the one hand, a world with fewer language barriers seems to be on the horizon, with enormous benefits, but also major limitations. Think about quality, copyright, privacy, gender, race, and other biases, the false impression that human translation is no longer needed and that a profession will soon be obsolete, technological sovereignty, and linguistic equality. It is essential that users are much more aware of the objections and risks associated with AI-driven translations that do not meet European standards. And it is essential for the future of the profession that efficiency gains benefit not only clients, so publishers, but also translators themselves and the diversity and quality of translation products. So technological change and the changing profession require training. Translators and cultural mediators are needed more than ever, but they should be properly prepared for the changing practices of language professions and new professional challenges. It is important to make language studies therefore more relevant and more attractive to young people and to adapt them to new societal realities. Language studies can train new professionals to contribute to the optimization and correct application of language technology in all fields, including literary translation, and to make users aware of the possibilities and limitations of language and translation technology. Next slide, please. And so the Taalunie, to face all these new realities and the need for new and more adapted training, joins efforts with a lot of sister organizations. Let's say that the Taalunie is like an umbrella organization that works closely with, in the field of education and research, the IVN, it's the International Association for Dutch Studies. In the field of literary translation, it works closely with the Dutch Foundation for Literature and Flanders Literature to promote Dutch and Flemish literature abroad. Then there is also the Center for Literary Translation Expertise, which promotes the quality of literary translation into and from Dutch. And finally, it's not on the slide, but I would like to add it, there is also the Dutch Language Institute. So the joint efforts in all those fields make the answers to all the challenges more complete and comprehensive. Next slide, please. This one I already covered in the previous slide, so the next one, please. And that's the last one. It's a slide with the best practices. Basically, the Taalunie and its sister organizations, they focus on 4 objectives. The first one would be to ensure the recruitment of Dutch language professionals and the retention of active translators in the profession. And therefore, I will give one example, the example of the Expertise Center for Literary Translation. It's a center that collects, develops, and disseminates knowledge and expertise tailored to the market and the needs of society. It organizes training programs for translators working into and from Dutch. And these programs include local translation workshops, seminars, online and on-site courses, and various forms of individual mentorships. The main way in which this center gathers information and shares knowledge, important in Dutch, is through the Knowledge Bank. And the ultimate goal is to help ensure that there are enough translators and thus enough translations of Dutch language works into other languages and of foreign language books into Dutch. In this way, translation contributes to the internationalization of the Dutch language and culture. Goal 2, strengthen international Dutch studies as a trainer of translators, because International Dutch Studies is the main supplier of Dutch translators worldwide. And therefore, the Taalunie aims to integrate translation as part of the curriculum for Dutch as a foreign language. So adapting the curriculum is often difficult because of the diversity and complexity of the translation profession, and also because of the few number of lecturers in foreign countries. So the Taalunie therefore focuses on the exchange of knowledge and expertise through networking. In 2023, 2 Dutch language translation networks were set up: the Professional Translation and Interpreting Network and the PetraNet network. It's like a daughter network of Petra-E, but Duncan will talk about that later. Goal 3, contribute to the dissemination, diversity and quality of language and cultural products. There is one project, for instance, at the University of Vienna. It's called Dutch Literature in Translation Project. And it consists in a kind of digital library and bibliography of literature in translation and adaptation, which studies on Dutch literature in translation and that are accessible to a wide audience. So it's disseminate translated work or information on translated works to a wider audience. And then the 4th goal is to support translation into from Dutch through digital developments. So one example would be the Petra-E European School for Literary Translation this summer in 2024. The subject was creativity and the human factor, but there was also an emphasis on the creative use of computer tools in literary translation and its didactics. And another example, it's related again to the Dutch Literature in Translation project. Now they will use AI to check the readability of book reviews in the database and to generate summaries in English. So this also would contribute to the visibility of Dutch literature worldwide. So it's like an alliance of technology and translation to promote the internationalization of Dutch and Flemish literature. Final reflections, 3 final reflections. There is clearly a need to send a signal. Language learning deserves the attention of European policymakers. Therefore, we call on the European Union. Couldn't something be done to ensure that all 24 EU languages, literatures, and cultures are taught in at least one university in every country? The Taalunie, and me too, we still believe in this ideal world. And then the lack of students can be overcome by offering online courses, as the best practice of Dutch in Sweden shows. The solution was to offer all courses digitally, making them accessible to potential students throughout Sweden and not only in Stockholm. So addressing the lack of language programs and training will help to address the lack of translators and will promote cultural diversity. Reflection 2, technology. It's here. It can't be turned back. It will have an impact on literary translation, just as it has it in other fields of translation. Taking part in the debate and development of computer-assisted technology and exploring how technology can be used to promote creative translation can be of great practical benefit both for translators and the overall quality of the translations, as it can be in many ways an ally in the field of language teaching and translation. why not try at least to make the most out of it in accordance always with European legal and ethical standards and norms. And then finally, empowerment, agentivation, as we heard this morning. The translator is an author, and shouldn't we protect artistic freedom of the literary translator also to use or not to use technology, again in accordance with norms and standards? This means knowing the limitations of machine translation, dealing with them, and communicating and advising clients, publishers, and the wider world about them. In this respect, it is important to include the ontological aspects also in literary translation programs. So these were my reflections, and I want to thank the organizers of this event. And also I would like to thank, and I think I can do it on behalf of all my colleagues, the Nederlandse Taalunie and its sister organizations for all the support they're giving us for translations from and into Dutch. I think we are a privileged section of literary translators. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Goedele. Yes, you've laid out some really thought-provoking developments there. I was thinking as you were presenting the problems for small and medium-sized languages under pressure from the perspective of the UK with our difficulties recruiting students to take all languages other than English. It feels as if all languages are under that kind of pressure. I'll come back to that in my talk. I was very interested in your relatively upbeat presentation of the impact of AI and suggesting that AI will not eliminate human translators, but that it means that translator training is needed more than ever in this respect. I'm sure we'll be coming back to that point in the course of our discussions. And a final thought as well, when you were pointing out how important networking has been to Dutch language organizations. I think that's been very evident in the UK in particular, where long before COVID, a network existed for learning Dutch online. Thank you, Goedele. I'm going to move now to my own presentation. And I have two areas to focus on in my talk. The British Centre for Literary Translation, where I work, and the Petra E network, of which BCLT is a founding member. Next slide, please. I have quite a lot of slides, so you'll probably be hearing that a fair bit. The British Centre for Literary Translation is in a unique position as the UK's only academic research centre that focuses specifically on literary translation. We're a hybrid organisation with a mission to support the literary translation profession and promote the education and training of literary translators both within the university and beyond. Next slide, please. BCLT was founded in 1989 by my predecessor, the late W.G. Sebald. Max was Professor of European Literature at my university, the University of East Anglia, and a renowned German language writer and critic who opted to live in the UK and continue writing in German. Next slide, please. Max Sebald founded BCLT in 1989. We are a research centre based in the School of Literature, Drama and Creative Writing at the University of East Anglia in Norwich, which is in eastern England. We have a physical base, which you see here in the Arts and Humanities building at UEA, which houses our manager, Anna Good, who is also here in the audience, and you see here represented at her desk, and the BCLT Library of Translations and Translation Studies Research, which has built up over the last 35 years to several thousand volumes by now, largely thanks to donations from visiting translators and translation scholars. Next slide, please. Within the university, BCLT runs a PhD program of research into literary translation and one of only two master's programs specifically for literary translation in the UK. As you may know, UEA established the first MA program in creative writing in the UK in 1970, and we work in close collaboration with our colleagues in creative writing, teaching and researching into literary translation as a creative writing activity. Next slide, please. So we had a sneak peek there. This is the National Centre for Writing, also in Norwich. And since 2015, we've had a formal collaboration agreement with NCW. They led a successful bid for Norwich to be England's first UNESCO City of Literature. The Writers' Centre, National Centre for Writing, are supported by the Arts Council of England in their own programme of literary translator support. Next slide, please. So internationally, we work with networks such as Récit, about whom we heard this morning, the umbrella organisation for translator houses across Europe. We have a programme of translators in residence at BCLT, including an annual visitor from India, sponsored by the Charles Wallace India Trust. As part of the MA in Literary Translation, my colleague Ceci Rossi runs also a programme of translation workshops on campus in Norwich, which are free and open to the general public. Next slide, please. In 2010, my former BCLT colleague Daniel Hahn established a programme of emerging translator mentorships, which is now run very successfully by National Centre for Writing. This is a programme that pairs an emerging translator with an established colleague who can give advice and support not only on translation matters, but above all, perhaps help in establishing a translator within the profession. Next slide, please. BCLT's flagship event, which is co-sponsored by the National Centre for Writing, is the annual BCLT International Literary Translation and Creative Writing Summer School. The week-long BCLT Summer School has a number of unique features. It brings together translators from a variety of languages to work in parallel workshop groups. These workshops are designed to encourage collaboration and peer learning in a small group setting so that translators can learn from each other and counter the habitual solitariness of the translator. Translators work towards a single consensus translation of an extract from a contemporary work of literature by a living writer. And they are led in this by a workshop leader who is a renowned literary translator. And in the language-specific workshops, there are also multilingual workshops. In the language-specific workshops, participants have the unique opportunity of actually working with the author of the text they are translating. So our summer school now alternates between in-person events on campus in Norwich and online. Next slide, please. So since 2021, we have complemented our summer school with an online-only advanced translation workshop each autumn. So this is then for more advanced translators and focuses on specific languages. So far, these have been Catalan, German, Scandinavian languages, and in November this year, literature from Taiwan. Next slide, please. Our online program also includes regular book launches and research seminars, which have built up to a substantial archive of recordings on YouTube. Next slide, please. Since 2000, we've sponsored an annual public lecture, the Sebald Lecture. Recordings of these lectures are also available on YouTube. Each year, we invite a significant cultural figure to give a lecture on some aspect of literary translation. And this year, it will be the former Archbishop of Canterbury and notable literary translator himself, Rowan Williams. That will be in person at the British Library in London and online. Next slide, please. Talking of London, BCLT is also part of the organising committee for the Literary Translation Centre at the annual London Book Fair. And shown here is the panel on AI and literary translation, which I chaired at this year's event in March. Next slide, please. So at this point, and for my remaining time, I want to pivot to focus on the Petra E network, which I have the honor to chair. The original Petra E project was funded by the Erasmus Plus program and led by Carlijn Waterman of the Dutch Language Union. You see one of our gatherings here, as well as BCLT. The Petra E project included 7 other partners, academic and non-academic European translator training institutions. Petra E builds on the earlier Petra project, the Plateforme Européenne pour la Traduction littéraire, and the additional E stands for education. So it's a little unwieldy, but there we go. Petra E as a project ran from 2014 to 2016 with the aim of establishing a framework that could offer a systematic overview of all the skills and knowledge a literary translator is supposed to have. So no small ambition then. Next slide. The outcome of the original Petra E project was this framework. The model adopted was orientated according to competencies. We were able to take inspiration in particular from 2 already existing competence models, namely the model of the European Masters in Translation and that developed by the PACTE research group at the University of Barcelona. What primarily distinguishes the Petra E model from these 2 predecessors is that its competence list is complemented by a learning line which distinguishes 5 levels of competence acquisition. So 5 levels, 8 sets of competences. What results then is a grid, as you see here. And this was the main outcome of the original project in 2016, the Petra E framework for the education and training of literary translators. Next slide, please. So at the end of the project then, the framework was initially published in 7 languages, in Dutch, English, French, German, Hungarian, Italian, and Spanish. Next slide. Thank you. It was published in hard copy as a kind of roadmap, if you will, and also online, which allowed us to supplement some of the competencies with further materials, to add a full bibliography, to map the existing courses in literary translation available across Europe, and so on. Next slide, please. So after 2016, the Petra E project morphed into a more informal network, which now has over 30 members. The network aims to facilitate European collaboration and exchange for the education and training of literary translators by continuing the work of the Petra E project and supporting the further implementation of the framework. Our activities have continued to focus on the framework, promoting its implementation and revising it to reflect changes in the profession. There are now no fewer than 15 different language versions of the framework available. And earlier this year, we unveiled an updated 2nd edition of the framework based on the feedback we'd received. What you're seeing now is actually the 2nd revised edition. In appearance, it is as before, but the revision aims to do better justice to topics such as training for literary translators on machine translation, AI, and computer-assisted translation tools, training for better liaison with the publishing industry, and for better reflecting diversity in the literary translation profession. Next slide, please. Colleagues at the ELV in Utrecht have produced an interactive version of the framework which serves as a kind of diagnostic tool and allows individual translators to map their own way through it. Next slide. The network then, since 2016, has continued to hold regular twice-yearly meetings, and these have been supplemented by 2 academic conferences so far. As you see here, they were at Trinity College Dublin in 2021, and most recently at the West University of Timișoara in Romania in May this year. Next slide, please, and this is my final slide. In the interest of promoting the Petra E framework, in 2017, the network initiated a successful high-level Training the Trainer summer school for teachers of literary translation. We've just held the 8th edition of ESLT, and that continues online each year. So the framework itself has needed revision, reflecting the changes in the profession since 2016, and of course that's set to continue, so we envisage further revisions in years to come. Let me conclude, though, my presentation by just outlining some challenges as I see it from the BCLT and Petra E perspectives. I'll pick out 3, and I'm going to be following from Goedele's presentation in a number of respects here. Clearly, the rise of AI needs addressing within our training programs for literary translators too. Until this point, I think it's probably fair to say that literary translator training programs have resisted the need to offer orientation training in computer-assisted translation tools, and that situation has already changed. I think it's certainly changing fast, and I think training programs need to act quickly, really, to equip our literary translators of the future with the tools that they are going to need. I mentioned as a second point the situation in the UK, which is particularly problematic, of course, since Brexit. Poor recruitment to languages programs is a perennial problem for us. And I'll mention one last issue as well from the point of view of BCLT and our program, which with COVID was obliged to move online entirely. Since COVID, we've moved back to a balanced program of in-person and online activities. But getting that balance right is an issue that continues to exercise us. I'll leave things there. Thank you. And I'm going to pass the baton, so to speak, the virtual baton, on directly to our colleague Françoise.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay. So I would have preferred to speak French because, but I was forced to write my paper in English. So, let me tell you 2 stories. Yes, I have to present 2 institutions, so I'll try to keep the time, to respect the time imposed. So, a very particular literary wind must have been blowing in the 80s, at least in Belgium and France, and no doubt in other places too. Without each other's knowledge, 2 translators who were also teachers, Michel Grasset, translator of Faulkner in Paris, and I, a translator of German in Brussels, were losing patience. The market was awash with too many translations that were mediocre and indeed bad. One possible explanation was that the publishers bringing foreign literature into our language were hiring amateur translators without checking their skills. Practitioners of this very difficult art were clearly being selected without any kind of filter. Anyone who developed a crush on an author and knew a foreign language assumed they could take on a book and attract a publisher, notably by charging discount prices. Most specialist professionals can't work without a certificate or diploma to prove that they have acquired the specific knowledge and skills required. So, why was it possible to embark on a career as a literary translator without receiving specialist training or passing any kind of test? Of course, there were some magnificent published translations, usually the work of a writer with no formal training in translation, or a brilliant but untutored amateur. They were, however, the exception. I myself had no training in translation, and it was all my life I translated. But well, you will see later. With these concerns in mind, Michel Gresset in Paris and I decided we needed to change things. There were university courses in translation, but they were usually delivered by philologists who were not necessarily writers, far from that. And academic translation is a very different thing from literary rewriting. So there were not enough. In Brussels, we agreed that, like music and the visual arts, literary translation, which is also an art, should be taught through practice. Magical word. By practitioners. So, through publicity on the radio and in the press, we launched new workshops run by the finest translators of the day, who would pass on their knowledge and skills, like a master painter in the Renaissance studio, teaching trainees to hold the brush and mix the colors. Translation theory would not be taught in the abstract, but would be brought in punctually to assist with the particular problem that students encountered and which motivated them. Motivation is very important, and stimulated their curiosity. So to say, here and now, they are eager to see how theory responds to that specific problem they are confronted to at that moment. There is nothing like encountering a problem to make us curious to see how others have solved it. And so the Centre Européen de Traduction littéraire, CETL, was born. I was able to use rooms at the university where I taught, and I took full advantage with a passion. From the start, we offered several source and target languages: Dutch, English, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian. We ran the workshops on Saturdays, since we had students of all ages and backgrounds, many of whom were at work during the week. So you understand, it is a private school. The first and recurring question was, what qualifications were required to enroll? Mais madame, qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire avant de s'inscrire chez vous? A degree in languages or cultural studies was a must, of course. But the one key qualification for our students was the ability to read and write in their own mother tongue. To read in depth with sensitivity to the author's intentions and to the allusions, connotations, intertextuality, and music of the text. And when it came to rewriting, not only mastery of their mother tongue, but an ability to test and push it to its limits, like a poet. But not beyond. In French, I say, il faut savoir violenter la langue sans la violer. You see? So that it could make room for the other, the foreigner, accept him. In other words, the ability to create and recreate in their own language. Because a literary translator is a writer in the fullest sense. Too few people recognize that today. Yes, it's a writer, a poet in the fullest sense. In her yelling room, dans son gueuloir, Flaubert, you remember? She hunts, the translator hunts for the right word, the right rhythm and tone. When I translate, I'm also writing. I search, invent, imagine. I rewrite using my own experience and talent, though never taking the author's place. That goes without saying. Around 2016, And for a range of reasons, these in-person workshops were replaced by online training. While in-person workshops are excellent for promoting dialogue and discussion, breaking isolation and enabling participants to meet and engage with professionals, remote training offers invaluable personalized evaluation. In an in-person group, translations are critiqued phrase by phrase, word by word, but it is not possible to consider the overall coherence of a translation of the whole text for each student. Yes, yet this is of vital importance, the coherence of the whole text. A student's translation of a text needs to work from start to finish, from A to Z. It needs to form a whole that is faithful to the original in both its details and as a complete piece of writing. Correcting a translation requires us to identify and provide precise, objective descriptions of the different errors, which may relate to vocabulary, syntax, melody, or rhythm, but which can also manifest more subtly. The overall coherence of a text is a matter of tone, melody, and voice, the voice of the text, and an essential element that would take too long to discuss in detail here. It needs a whole colloquium. Today, CETL is going from strength to strength, with a team of around 100 translators to correct student works and over 200 students from a very wide range of backgrounds. All language combinations are accepted, since each simply requires us to put together a team of competent correctors. We now offer training in translation from languages such as Arabic, Japanese, Hungarian, and Romanian. I know that CETL is excellent for students seeking a creative outlet who find it in our training. Each of them is an enthusiast, which is the other indispensable qualification for joining us. The first stage of the course has 2 levels, each leading to a final examination. There is no time limit for students to complete their level. They can take 6 months or 6 years over a level, a module, to fit around their private and professional life. This flexibility is one huge advantage of our course. Another is that each of the 10 exercises for each module is marked by a different corrector, since CETL's philosophy is that students should encounter the many possible approaches to translation that are adopted by the different correctors in relation to different authors and genres. So, in one level, they are corrected by 5 to 8 teachers, different teachers. And sometimes they contradict each other. Very interesting. Once they have completed both levels, students can enroll for the higher mémoire stage, which can take up to 3 years, during which they write a new translation with a commentary on the difficulties they have found in the course of the work. This stage also includes a regular series of remote workshops focusing on the publishing world, translation contracts, readers' reports, and much more. All of this leads to the award of a diploma, which, though it has no official equivalent, does something that seems to me better, since it provides a long list of all the professionals who have been involved in the students' training. A publisher can't fail to be impressed if they see that top-flight professionals, star translators, have given the students an excellent mark. The pass mark for the commented translation is 17 out of 20. Our diploma is thus more akin to an excellent letter of recommendation, which all adds up to a marvelous springboard propelling our graduates into the heart of the profession. Meanwhile, in Paris, Michel Gresset set up a postgraduate training course in the form of a one-year master for English only. The philosophy of his school was slightly different from ours, but his course brought students into contact with industry professionals, both translators and publishers, which the universities largely did not. Both CETL and Michel Gresset's school, Charles V is called, he recognized that practice that enables students to discover their own weaknesses, as opposed to the errors identified by translation theory. So they recognized that practice was the best way to develop the learner's skill as a writer. So I feel it is fair to say that Michel Gresset and I were pioneers, which is something we are both very proud of. That's it. Michel, are you satisfied? He's dead, you know. That's why I looked at the ceiling. Yes. So that was for CETL. And now, I have 3 pages on CEATL. Last but not least, the time has come for me to present CEATL, a European Council of Associations of Literary Translators, the prestigious institution to which we owe our meeting. Thank you to the organizers, they are not here, for the enormous task they have taken on, and which, under the oversight of Cécile Deniard and Valérie Le Pruynec, was bound to be a success. I have 5 minutes to talk about CETL, but I think that is enough because most of you here know all about it already. Anything I don't have time to say is available for you to read on our website. What may be less familiar to you is how and why it was founded at all. Once again, we must go back to the 1980s. And once again, the story starts with a band of dreamers at the third Assise de la traduction littéraire en Arles in 1987, having a drink together in a café not far from Van Gogh's Yellow House in Arles. All we agreed that, we were 6 or 7, that in this multilingual continent where translation is necessarily a major activity, those who carried out the world's second oldest profession, Françoise Cartanos used to say that, not me, yes, lacked financial security, making the choice of translation as a full-time profession risky at best. Mindful that unity is a reputed source of strength, the translator, present in Arles, decided to join forces and use the potential for action at the European level to improve their lot. So it was that a specific resolution founding the European Council of Literary Translators Association was drawn up and approved by vote. The aim was to establish a solid international and supra-governmental association, which at that time, mind you, could only be done in Belgium, in my small country, which is why we were and still are based in Brussels. And because there had to be a Belgian on the board, I became part of the great adventure that saw a little mouse turn into a big mountain. Interesting to mention too, yes, in 1992, CEATL became a member of the European Writers' Congress. On the 24th of June 1993 in Brussels, the board approved the statutes. CEATL was registered as an international association with a civil personality under Belgian law by royal, we have a king, by royal order of 17 November 93. Set up by 10 founder members, CEATL has 36 members association from 27 countries across Europe, representing some 10,000 individual literary translators. Its main objective, you know them, On the internal front, we gather information on the situation of literary translation and translators in the member countries and share experiences and examples of best practice. On the external front, we defend the legal, social, and economic interests of literary translators in a European context, which includes EU lobbying and reacting publicly to trends or events impacting on our profession and on the quality of literary translation. We help individual member associations to strengthen the position of literary translator in their countries, and it works. Our work is expanded in all directions. We set up working groups for targeted problems, such as translator visibility. And for a long time, CECIL ran the group dealing with our legal position, setting up mediation and negotiations and monitoring their implementation according to the law of different countries. You can imagine what a huge job that was. We are proud to recall, too, that in 1991, very few people know that here, CEATL received its first invitation to a meeting of the DG10 of the EEC on books, Perseverance at its Virtues. And also, in 1993, the Strasbourg Parliament, in the person of our friend Jean Gattegnaud, I don't know, formally invited the representatives of CETL to take part in a European Conference of Translation. So this is not the first one. Open to the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. The institutions in Brussels were no longer ignoring us. You can find all the rest on our website. Among others, the list of all our successive presidents who have steered CETL along all the best paths down the years. And in the name of the deceased founders, as well as those still living, I would like officially to express here my profound gratitude for the efficient and beautiful realization they have given to the dream of a group of friends who once believed in advancing the cause of literary translators and decided to act on it one beautiful summer's day in 1987, somewhere on a sunny terrace in the south of France. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Françoise, and I'm so glad that we have had the opportunity as part of this panel to acknowledge and to celebrate the work of our hosts, CEATL. Next, we're going to hear from Rosie.
Thank you. Thank you, Françoise. I was moved by your presentation because I know your work. And I'm going to talk about a cousin of your school in a way, or a brother, I don't know. So before I came here, I went to visit my friend Olivier Manoni, far away from here. I mean, my here was Paris when I wrote these few words, in the Pyrenees Mountains where he lives now. As I was going to represent him and our school here in front of you, I asked him, what am I going to tell them? And he said, I quote him, tell them I'm the founder of a funny startup. I have to stress the accent. CETL, École de traduction, littéraire. The whole story began one afternoon in January 2012 at the CNL, Centre National du Livre. Olivier was asked to plan a school for literary translation beyond particular languages and beyond academic studies, a school of after knowledge, a school of doing a craft, an art, the concrete doing of literary translation, a school for young and less young translators who published already at least 3 translations. The main idea was what some of us felt in our practices, that the language you translate from is less important than the understanding of the literary text and its transport to another language. Therefore, you can create multilingual workshops and study with a stagiaire how you achieve the delicate and impossible transportation of form, meaning, and sound of a literary text in a given language. Besides, thought Olivier Manoni, the architect of our school, young translators don't know enough what is a contract, what are the different steps from translation to editing, publishing, correcting proofs, etc. What is the whole book business? So he planned a yearly course. It was a 2-year course at the beginning, taking place on Saturdays, because seniors and juniors work during the week, every 2 weeks during a whole day. The mornings are devoted to the technical aspects of the making of a book, and all the professionals of the book business come and tell the students, the so-called students, about their profession, from the printer to the proof corrector, the graphic designer, etc., etc. And in the afternoon, this takes 3 hours in the morning, and in the afternoon, during 3 and more hours, the senior translators tell the so-called junior how we translate. Each one of us in its own particular way. We are 25 senior translators in 20 different languages and different approaches concerning translation. We teach in French and do the training in French, but the texts brought by each of us can be in any language, and it works. Translators have a good ear, even when they don't understand the text. I have a short presentation. I can explain to you exactly what we do later on. So from 2012 to 2024, in 12 years, we had some 195 trainees, 12 graduations in 52 languages. Our graduates had 35 translation prizes. CETL has also external activity. We have a yearly course at the ENS, École Normale Supérieure, attended both by astrophysicians and philosophers or linguists, just for the sake of the translation, the pleasure of playing this game, this artistic game. I teach there, and it's a pure pleasure to have an astrophysician being interested by translation, by translators like us. I mean, our life is devoted to it. And the Institut de Français of Korea, China, Japan, and Algeria invited us to organize a 1 or 2 months translation workshop by Zoom. I'm part of this passionate experience from the beginning till today. I love every minute of it because we all invent a different way of teaching literary translation. And somehow we all feel like tightrope walkers, funambules. Exactly as I felt like a tightrope walker, speaking English here with my weakest language. So please excuse my mistakes, my clumsy sentences. You could hear my wonderful 3 other languages, but for the sake of Europe and literary translation, I have tried to be both personal and clear in my presentation of our École de traduction littéraire, ETL. Thank you, and thank you to Cécile and to the Rencontre Européenne to have invited me to present our school.
Thank you, Rosie. And I should say thank you to all of my panelists for presenting their thoughts in English this afternoon. I was very interested, Rosie, to hear in your description of your multilingual workshops how much the focus is on editing the target language. And I think that's emerging as, for me at least, as a kind of red thread perhaps from our speakers so far. I'm thinking, Françoise, about your remark, how important it is for your program that translators should be trained in reading and writing in their mother tongue. Exactly. And I'm thinking that links into our emphasis in Norwich as well on approaching translation as a kind of creative writing. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rosie. And can I invite now our final speaker, Jürgen Jakob Becker.
Yes, I want to talk about the programs of the Deutscher Übersetzerfonds, German Translators Fund, which was founded in 1997. And it's the main funding organization for literary translators and developed by translators in Germany. So our mission is to promote the art of translation, to offer individual grants for literary translators, further training and project funding. So we have a budget of maybe 2 million euros a year, and half of the budget is dedicated to grants, to individual grants to translators, maybe 200 to 250 grants for individuals every year. And we have about 400,000 euros for training programs and further training for translators. We are funded by the federal government, and we are based in Berlin at the Literarisches Kolloquium Berlin. But we are a national organization. That means our activities also take place, for example, in Strahlen, in the Übersetzerhaus Strahlen, or in Literaturhaus Munich, for example, or in other places. Next slide, please. And we have a little kit. This is the Toledo program, which is kind of an international program established in 2018. And it creates a space for encounters between the German language and international translation scenes and empowers literary translators to become active in their role as ambassadors between cultures and linguistic realms. This sounds very big and spectacular, but we have a lot of programs that are dedicated also from the two translators of German literature to other languages worldwide. Next slide, please. Toledo is also interesting because it has created new formats of expression of knowledge of translators. So, for example, the Toledo Journale, these are kind of translation diaries who invite to readers to the experiences of translators and allows to discover the materials that accumulate around and enrich a translated text. So we know these famous afterwords of big translations of the classics, of a new translation of Don Quixote and a large essay by the translator, why he did it, why we needed a new translation. But we also have the everyday work of translators, a new book translated maybe from Bulgarian, and a lot of context has to be given to this translation, and maybe the translator has the potential and also he wants to express all these or show this material that exists around the translation, and the online program is Toledo Journale, where he or she can show this. Cities of Translators is another program I just want to mention that we try to visit cities or see them as cities of translation. We've been to Kolkata and to Montreal, so these are of course very multilingual cities. And what role does literary translation play in these cities? What is the translation scene? How does it look like in these areas? What is the importance of translation? Are they, for example, in Kolkata, it can be very prestigious to be a translator into Bengali. Yeah? It's something where they are very proud of, and they are part of the big academies. Yeah? In other places, translators are just, nobody knows them by name, and so there are very different cultures, and so we try to show this in these cities of translators material, also online. Next slide, please. And our newest project is Babelwerk.de as a digital think tank, a space for reflection and a knowledge base involving many practitioners of literary translation. So you will find there a lot of essays about translation. We have an alphabet of translation with little texts about special aspects of translation written by professional translators. Mostly in German, I must confess, but it might be interesting for a lot of you, so please check it out. And it's also a database about texts about translation, so you can find a database which is collecting a lot of material that is published about translation. Next slide, please. So the main thing I want to talk about is the Akademie der Übersetzungskunst, the Academy of the Art of Translation. This is something that we developed within the last decades. Advanced training courses that are derived from the practice of literary translation and led by experienced practitioners of the profession. And these workshops are dedicated to professional translators. So our target group is people who say, I am a translator and I need some training, I need exchange with colleagues, and so on. And these seminars are, of course, free of charge. They are financed by us, so you get to travel to Berlin or to Strahlen or whatever, and so it's very important, I think, nowadays for the German scene. Everybody has had contact to this academy. Next slide, please. We have several seminar types. I don't want to explain this too much. One source language to target language German. This is a very common thing to have a seminar for translators of Swedish literature into German. They have a lot to discuss, of course. Next slide, please. Several source languages into one target language German. That's what we heard about already a little bit, so that we have these kind of seminars. When we started, this was the main type of seminars which allowed us to include also translators from the small languages. And it has the interesting thing is that you get more sensible for the target language. So you can learn something from a text translated from Japanese, even if you don't know Japanese, but you see a German result, yeah. And absolutely, this is what we share. I think this experience that it makes sense. How do I edit myself is another seminar, seminar for literary translators and editors together. Editing is maybe as strange as translating, because how do you learn editing? Yeah, it's learning by doing, of course, and to bring young editors especially together with translators to involve them in translation seminars. So this is an eye-opener for literary editors, how translators talk about text. This is different like how agents talk about text, for example. And so this is a very good example. Hieronymus program, this is our program for beginners. So whoever thinks that he or she should be a translator and wants to begin and has a text and wants to go on, can be part of this Hieronymus program. This is 1 week in Strahlen, a very intense week where we also invite mentors, and we talk a lot about, well, of course, about texts and about how the business is going, what it means to be a freelance translator, for example. Next slide, please. Vice versa, German, one target, from German into one target language and vice versa. German-Polish translation workshop. This is allows for a high degree of exchange between participants. Such a constellation creates an ideal space for discussing the intricacies of literary translation, and it can lead to unique insights. The specific difficulties of translating Polish text into German are related to the linguistic possibilities of German and vice versa. In these workshops, this observation turns from a problem into a gain. Each participant presents a text in progress to the whole group, not only to participants with the same target language for discussion. They receive a qualified reaction to their work, gain support in decoding complexities, and are also invited to think in the other direction. This brings a sensitization for the richness of the source language and one's own tongue as well. Working relationships forged at such international meetings with colleagues from the source language countries are often of considerable value. So mailing lists and discussion forums are built once you have such a group, and we have had this already with more than 30 combinations. German, Catalan, German, Estonian are the newest we had, but of course many German, Russian, German, Dutch, German, English, French, and so on. The next slide, please. Webinars, okay, this is something we started in the COVID time, and here we see we have quite a young audience. So beginners, they want to be part of these webinars, and they have special themes, of course. Next slide. guest professor, August Wilhelm von Schlegel, Gastprofessur. So the aim of this project is to develop the rich tradition of reflection derived from translational practice, which goes back to Luther and Schlegel. It's not so much that we try to identify good translators in the university, but to bring the knowledge of translation into the academic discourse. So, and the feedback is excellent because, the translators have a different kind of view on a text. They talk differently about texts, for example. These are not holy texts, but they texts to work with, yeah. And this is very attractive for students, as I think. And sometimes they have some translation practice there. And then for many of them, it's the first time they really try to write in a literary way. So it's an eye opener for many of the participants. Next slide. Gastdozenturen, literary translators as guest lecturers. So this is something we started in the COVID years when we had a lot of money. We received a lot of funding to react to the COVID crisis and also to artists, and we got some million euros to invest in translation programs. So we sent a lot of translators to universities as teachers, and nowadays we have 5 to 10 guest lecturers every year. So, and this is also what I said before, this is very successful. And we also see that this kind of finding new voices in translation is working somehow, although we are not recruiting. It's not a recruiting program. But we see in the Hieronymus program for the beginners that a lot of them, well, I took part in the program here and there, and it's something for me, I want to try it. Next slide, please. Seminar type 5, which is not so much a seminar about the art of translation, but it's together international translators of German literature. This is what we do every year in March. We bring these people to the RCB, Literarisches Kolloquium. We visit the Leipzig Book Fair. And a similar program is dedicated to poetry translation, Universe in June, and another one to German language, children's and young adult literature. And we also had another program this summer for a meeting of translators of Ukrainian literature. So it was part of the Archipelagos project that was represented earlier this morning. And it was normally, of course, you would do this in Kiev or Kharkiv. But we had the funds to do this once in Berlin. We had 40 participants, and it was an enthusiastic experience, I must say, to have so many very active, very engaged translators from Ukrainian. Next slide. These are our websites I want to recommend to you. And the last slide, there it is. We also have talked about this morning. The literary translation workshops are described in this document, which was part of the Translation in Motion project. And it is online on the RECI website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jürgen. Thank you to all of my speakers. What a wonderful panorama, what a tour d'horizon, what a Bestandsaufnahme. Thank you for your patience. We've presented you with a lot of information. There's such a rich variety of activities and models out there at the moment. We've heard about different programs and syllabi and initiatives. We've heard of best practices of all kinds and some of the challenges that we are facing within literary translator training across Europe at the moment. This was billed as a workshop, and I'm very aware that we've effectively presented you with another panel so far. I have other questions for my speakers. I had envisaged that we might spend some time having a panel discussion up here. But you know what? I think with 20 minutes to go, I think we cut to the chase. And can I open up to questions from the floor? Because I'm sure there will be many. And then please ask questions to any and all of us. And then we will, I'm sure all of our speakers will be able to contribute. So we have about 20 minutes left. And could I invite you, please just press the on button for your microphone. And yes, please.
This one. Oh, hello. This is for Duncan, if I may, please. A very tiny personal introduction to get to it. My daughter is currently doing a master's in creative writing at UEA after having done the degree in creative writing. What I would like to highlight is her path to get there, i.e. she attended a rather prestigious UK grammar school and she had very little support to do English, as the Dutch lady there was highlighting that the push is very much on STEM. But she persisted and she got there. So your thought on that, that's the first part. The second part of the question is, obviously, having followed my daughter onto her schooling, I've noticed that the quality of the English taught is not all that good. So referring to what you were saying, the perennial problems of getting a foreign teacher to teach foreign languages, there seemed to me that there is also a problem teaching English into English school to English people. So the question being more broadly, what kind of English is the UK going to export if that is the case? Thank you.
We'll start with the easy questions then, shall we? Thank you so much, and I'm very pleased to hear that your daughter is currently studying with us. Yes, I mean, you mentioned STEM. I think this is not just the case within the UK, but really across the countries that we represent. But certainly in the UK, and certainly with our previous government, the emphasis has been for a number of years now on encouraging students in schools to take up sciences, technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine, and that's very much at the expense of English, as you mentioned, of humanities, arts and humanities disciplines. Of course, in the UK, we have hopes from our new government, but we know well not to invest too many hopes in new political regimes. I think as a question to BCLT, we're very aware of the need to bring young translators or potential young translators forward into the university. Of course, it starts. What is it? It's the supposedly the Jesuits want to start educating young people from the age of 7. I'm not sure we reach back quite that far, but we have at BCLT, we've been part of an initiative to help translators to train translators to go into schools and to interest school students in the possibility of potentially a career in translation, but even just the fun that can be had and the excitement from working with other languages, particularly so-called community languages which certainly within UK schools rarely get sufficient attention. So it's certainly a real issue that we recognize. We're trying within our own program also to develop undergraduate modules which will then feed into our graduate programs. But sometimes it does feel like an uphill task. But I don't know if any other panelists wanted to come in there. I know you addressed it specifically to me, but Goedele.
Yes, maybe to the variety of language use. It's the case of English, but we have the same problem in Spanish and Dutch, and so there will always be like a more powerful version, probably because of economics, politics, and so on. But maybe we would try to accept all varieties, and no variety is better than another one. So I face this problem also. Well, I faced it in my own mother tongue. I'm Flemish, so most of the publishers are in Dutch. In the Netherlands, when I started to translate, I made an anonymous sample translation from Dutch into Spanish and from Spanish into Dutch. They didn't accept my translation into Dutch, but they did accept my translation into Spanish. So it's very strange. And also in France, for instance, I'm teaching translation from French into Spanish, but it was very difficult for me to get into the French translation department because of my variety of French. It's Belgian French, it's not French French. So I have always had those problems. So I really would say, let's accept all varieties and no one is better. So if your daughter or son has teachers from India, from, I don't know, from Pakistan and from UK and from Ireland, maybe that's better than only have teachers from UK. That's my vision of the question.
Yes, please.
Hi. A question for all of you, a general one. Do you think that a translator can work successfully into a language that they required later in life, meaning not their mother tongue, whatever mother tongue means?
Thank you. Rosie, please.
I'm teaching mainly from Hebrew. I've translated more than 100 books, and I have learned Hebrew. I began to learn Hebrew when I was 20, after 3 languages, so it was built on structure of other languages. I lived, of course, in Israel for years, and I was a scholar at the university, and at what time in my life I wanted to switch to literature, really, and translation is literature. So I was taught, not through university, but I have many diplomas behind me. It's also built on a very deep basis, let's say. I was taught Hebrew by the great writers I was translating. They just held my hand day after day for 35 years, from morning to evening. It's all my life. And I cannot have better teachers than authors with their different styles. But of course, in the same time, while translating, I went for 35 years already through a long, long journey from modern Hebrew all the way down to Old Hebrew, and a lot of reading, a lot of studying. Because I studied, and because I didn't study Hebrew, I thought I have to pay a very, very hard price to this language I haven't learned. So you see, I work very hard because I always feel I don't know. But at the same time, I discovered that French, my instruments, my being, I don't know it. We don't know languages. When we translate, we discover how much we are hopeless. Okay.
So do you translate into Hebrew?
No, from Hebrew to French. My instrument is French.
But would it be
French is your
possible
mother-
to do the other way?
No,
Never.
no.
But French is your mother tongue.
French is my father tongue.
Well,
I wrote a lot about it. It's a whole...
but you never translated into Hebrew.
No.
You never translated into Hebrew.
No, that's what my
Is that
colleague
because
asked
you were
me. I
afraid to do
cannot.
so?
I cannot translate to another language than French. French is my instrument, my organ.
Okay.
I can play with it as I cannot play with another language. I could translate into Turkish because I'm a Turkish speaker. I was born in Turkey. But it's not that anymore.
Okay, sorry, I don't want to sort of monopolize the microphone, but I'm just really curious. Is it because you acquired Hebrew later in life that you do not translate into Hebrew, or is that because your knowledge of Hebrew isn't good enough? You deem it yourself not to be good enough, or have you been told to never translate into Hebrew, or received rejections when you did try?
It's a question of writing. And I discovered at what point, at one particular point, that I'm a writer, and that's why I'm translating. And I'm a writer in French. That's my language. I love people like Becker and Kafka and Nathalie Sarraute. All these people translated themselves. And I do translate myself from an unknown language. But the way I play with French, the way I try to push the limits of French, I cannot do it in another language.
Yeah, some decades ago, we would have said, no, don't do it. Just translate in your mother tongue. Mm-hmm. I think this is changing. We have examples in Germany. Eva Profusova, she's translating from Czech to German. She learned it when she came with 20 or so. We have a migration society, so you don't know exactly what is the mother tongue, and so what do we do with the Afghan refugees who say, I try to translate, and maybe it's not perfect, but it's something you can work with. So I'm not sure about this absolutely mother tongue rule.
There's no mother tongue.
Françoise, thank you.
There are two levels in the knowledge of language, the passive level and the active level. So, for instance, I can understand all the nuances and a language perfectly, but not be able myself to reproduce it so well. Many people forget that. And it's not astonishing that, for instance, a great translator, let's say from Swedish into French, doesn't know how to manage in a town for ordinary things, or to talk there, because it's a passive language that is important for the translator. Now you know the great linguist Claude Agege. Claude Agege, yes, you must read him. Yes, it will Yeah, Claude Agès is a great linguist, and he said, he wrote about that your mother tongue is the tongue in which you have grown up, little by little. So you have that tongue in your flesh, in your brain, in your body, everywhere. You can't have that another language. But, he says, if you teach a child 2 languages at the same time, the father Flemish, the mother French, the child will be bilingual, perfectly bilingual, because he has grown, and then he could translate in both directions. But this is very rare, very rare. Moreover, to be able to translate into a foreign language, it's better to live in the country, because the language evaluates, develops, and you lose the contact with the real language. So I should say like him, no, don't.
Goedele.
Yeah, so I am an unexisting being then, because I'm translating into another language. My mother tongue is Dutch, and I'm translating into Spanish. But why? Because 35 years ago I moved to Spain, and I also studied Spain at university. And I'm not a rare case or a rare being. I think it's because of mobility is much easier now. And what you said is also true. When you leave your country, you lose context. So, for instance, Dutch of young people it's changing, and I'm not living any longer in Flanders or in the Netherlands. I'm living in Spain. I'm in touch with all the fields of Spanish language. So I think my mother tongue is still my mother tongue, but my main language is now Spanish. And even in the European institutions, they changed the conditions for the exam. So before it was a mother tongue, but now they say main language and 2 or 3 other languages. So I really think it depends on situation, personal situation, circumstances, but I think it's possible. So I have translated a lot of books into Spanish. So
but you are an exception.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean it seriously.
Yeah, but I know other people also in Spain, and it's also because of the changing circumstances in the whole world. There's a lot of migration. So I think it's possible. If you want to.
That I don't have my microphone on. I think we've established that was a great question, and that, as they say, it's a very live issue, and we've had quite a variety of responses. To bring things back to translator education and training, I'm just thinking that at UEA we don't legislate that our students must translate into a first language. We certainly permit students to translate out of a first language. I'm reminded as well, I referred in my talk earlier to a program that we've been running for over 25 years now in collaboration with the Charles Wallace India Trust, and I'm remembering a conversation I had with one of our visiting Indian translators, a very distinguished translator from Bengali into English, Sanjukta Dasgupta, from the University of Calcutta, and she said, well, look, English is the language of my education. She didn't put it this way, but it's a no-brainer that I should translate, therefore, into English. So I think there's a real divergence of opinion here, but I think, as Jürgen was saying, things have been changing in recent years. We are rapidly running out of time, but I'd like to take one more question, and that's over here.
Thank you. I'll try to make it quick. I was wondering, because there's an elephant in the room, I think, about financial viability of being a translator. I'd say to anyone young and bright, don't do it. And I might say to anyone old and bright, get out while you still can. If I was thinking in monetary terms alone. But I'm wondering, all your brilliant programs, do you see... Jürgen mentioned that some of those webinars served as recruitment tools. Do you see any recruitment prospects, and do you see any retainment prospects in some of the work you do? Do you have any idea of whether you keep an interest alive, so to speak, or whether it can be used in specific ways to recruit new translators? That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Merci. The ETL became a huge group working in the French market, in the French literary editing market. And we had a good, we are a good label now. So if our students get prizes, it's because they are given the opportunity, they are already young translators, and they are given the opportunity to try to have a good book, because editors know they are coming from a good place, okay? And among them, during the years, the 12 years, the students became friends. Like they know, you know, there's somebody who is looking for a Japanese translator. So it's like a school, you know. It's formal, but it works.
So we don't try to convince people to get translators, of course. We tell them the truth and how it looks like and what are the conditions and so on. But the people who come to us, they are quite enthusiastic. So there's quite a high level of personal enthusiasm about language, about literature. I want to translate, I want to be part of the book world, and all this motivation must come together to think about starting a career as a translator. And so there is still a high hurdle to be überwinden,
Overcome.
To be overcome, to get the first jobs and to get the first translations. So these people are quite, I would say they are quite skilled already, and they are maybe not 22, but 32 maybe, and so they have a little bit of life experience and know what they are doing. So that's the situation now. Recruiting, there is also always people want, so it's attractive. So I don't have to tell you why, so you know more than I about this. I'm not a translator, I'm the only not translator here, and but I can talk like a translator.
Françoise?
Yes, I would like to emphasize this. A literary translator shouldn't practice that craft, that art, to earn money. No, but out of passion, like you would choose to paint or to make music, play piano. I personally was a professor, and so I had the money from my profession. And for me, literary translation, and I have been translating since 60 years, has always been a passion. The best moments I have in my life are with my children and with translation, because it's creative. That's what I like in that art. It's creation. It's like a game. Always and now. Oh, it's passion, really. And so all the students, all the candidates that ask me, that want to enroll in my school, I read in their messages if they have the enthusiasm or are just there to become famous or earn money. No, the ones who succeed are the ones who are passionate and enthusiastic and do that for the fun and for the art's sake, I would say.
It's such a difficult climate at the moment, isn't it? I'm reminded, if I may be permitted, a personal anecdote. The day my undergraduate finals results came out and they were posted on the notice board, and I bumped into my undergraduate tutor, and it turned out had good enough results to go on to do graduate work. And he asked what I was planning to do, and I said I'd like to do graduate work. And he said, "Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea. There aren't any jobs in academia, you know." This was I think ever since then I've been determined not to be that guy, to give my students encouragement to enter the profession, and I think that's as necessary as ever and as possible as ever. I think I was to go back to Goedele's remarks about AI. I think it's easy to say, oh gosh, there are not going to be any jobs, so don't bother learning how to translate because human translators will not be needed. I don't think that's. I just don't think that's right either. I think the task for us is to ensure that that there continue to be jobs for human translators. It's a task we need to exert ourselves precisely at this point. But I see absolutely no reason why we shouldn't succeed in that. I did want to end up on an upbeat note. Maybe I've succeeded, maybe I've persuaded you, but we do need to wrap up. We've gone a little over, but I asked Cécile in advance and she said we could maybe borrow just 5 minutes out of our next break. Thank you to those of us who have joined online. Thank you very much to those of you here in the room, and particularly to those who've asked really good questions. And above all, thank you very much to all my speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Danke.